Hey there, Greg. What's on your mind today?
I was going to ask Dr. Anders, if you go to Exodus and read the Ten Commandments, there's a commandment against graven image. Okay, so I help with the local confirmation class, and we hand out these little cards, and all of a sudden it's not on there. And then down here at the bottom it's do not covet. So anyway, what's the difference and why?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the question. So if you read Deuteronomy 5 or Exodus chapter 20, you're going to find the same list of commandments, and you're going to find the prohibition on images and all of the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you consult summaries of the commandments, you will sometimes get different lists and different numberings depending on which Christian tradition produced the summary. Because the Catholic tradition understands, interprets, and numbers the commandments differently than the Reformed tradition. That's the tradition of Presbyterians, Dutch Reformed, the Puritans, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And here's where the difference comes from. The first commandment tells us to have no other gods other than Yahweh, and not to make images to such gods and bow down and worship them. Now, if you consult the biblical text, you don't find numbers. You know, it's not like the count from Sesame Street, number one, number two. You know, you don't find numbers.
Yeah.
The numbering is a subsequent interpretation. It just lists the things not to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Ulrich Zwingli was a Protestant theologian of the 1520s who, for philosophical reasons, more than biblical ones, had a strong antipathy towards visual art and music as well in sacred worship. And so he whitewashed his churches and was iconoclastic and broke statues and painted over paintings and so forth. And it was convenient to him to break out the commandment against graven images from the first commandment and to list it as its own standalone commandment. And then he could point to his contemporaries and say, see, sacred scripture says no images, no images, forgetting that this is really an adjunct to the commandment on not having other gods. Now, when you do that, you have a problem. All of a sudden, now you have 11 commandments instead of 10. And since there is a reference in Scripture to the 10 words,
Yes.
they thought, well, we got to conflate this down to 10. What are we going to contract? If we're going to break number 1 in half, we got to contract something else.
Mm-hmm.
And what they did was they contracted the commandments against coveting, because in the Catholic way of numbering the commandments, we say don't covet your neighbor's wife. Period. That's its own standalone commandment.
Mm-hmm.
Then the 10th commandment is, don't cover his ox or his land or his golf clubs or his, favorite set of baseball cards or his country club membership or whatever, his new Tesla or whatever it might be. Now you'll notice that when you conflate don't covet your neighbor's wife and don't covet his golf clubs into one commandment, you have suddenly reduced the wife to the golf clubs.
Rude.
You've made her like a possession,
Yeah.
like those other things. And the way Catholics number them, not coveting your neighbor's wife is a fundamentally different order from not covering his sneakers.
Of course.
And there's a person there. And it also distinguishes, say, lust from covetousness as well, as a kind of thing, a kind of capital sin that could lead to that, very pernicious sin. So that's philosophically the reason they sometimes get numbered differently.
Hope that makes sense for you. Thank you so much for your call.